I want to offer my deep gratitude now for all the musicians that have been holding our worship together through the summer under the guidance of Dr. Yvonne Ng and her brilliant capacity and skill and for collaboration and bringing so many voices together. In particular, Steve Bogart, today, your music is just wonderful, just wonderful. When I sit here or stand here in this chapel, I realize that I have no memory of having walked into a Unitarian Universalist church for the first time, because I was born and raised UU. Presumably, I was in my mom's belly at some point. But I have been listening to the stories from you, for those of you who did walk into a UU church for the very first time, and the first-time visitors. And the stories that I hear is that people are seeking welcome and comfort, connection, inspiration, hope, affirmation, religious freedom, and a safe space to ask questions. Most people are not looking to serve on a committee, but heck, why not? It's always nice to be needed, so sure, I'll serve on that committee. What people are usually not looking for is to change. Not usually. Usually they're just looking for affirmation for who they are, to be loved, not to become somebody else. Yet that is often what we ask of visitors. We invite them to come in, find a welcoming place where they can fit in. Where they can fit in. What if a new person doesn't quite fit in? Rather than ask, who are these people that don't fit in? Maybe we need to ask, what is it that visitors are being asked to fit into? So this is what radical hospitality is all about. And radical hospitality is now placed at the top of our strategic plan, so it's good we start to understand and unpack what this is. Hospitality in itself is about being welcoming, open doors, smiles, words of welcome, information, invitation to a conversation or to share in a cup of tea or coffee or even a meal. Radical hospitality is about something much deeper and harder to offer. It's about what appears to be a paradox, simultaneously accepting someone and inviting change. We can find this paradox in our third Unitarian Universalist principle, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. This paradoxical relationship of acceptance while encouraging growth is a recognition that every one of us deserves to be inherently loved and affirmed for who we are and who we want to be. All of us want to be our true self, even if we're not quite sure what that true self is, while also acknowledging we are growing and changing beings. The deep religious path is a journey, not an endpoint. It's a journey of transformation in small and sometimes large shifts. In our third UU principle, with acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth, it happens on two levels, internally and externally. I just call it, through the lens of hospitality, internal hospitality and external hospitality. The internal work is fraught with resistance. Internal radical hospitality requires a capacity, a courage, and a willingness to take a hard look inward. The poem by Rumi and the reading we heard by Sister Paintner points to our lack of self-love, something that occurs too frequently. The ancient mystics, such as Teresa of Avila, frequently wrote of the need for the soul to enter within itself in a journey of self-exploration and acceptance. In Teresa's great 16th century masterpiece, The Interior Castle, she uses the image of a castle with many rooms as the place for the great human internal quest in the spiritual life. Those who choose to stay outside the castle, she believes, are choosing to stay paralyzed and condemned to misery. This internal work has long been promoted by the great mystics, such as Teresa, across time and in many religious traditions. And it is believed that it must happen in order for there to be peace in the larger world. Teresa quotes her teacher, Jesus, as he teaches the apostles. As he says, "Believe me, unless we have peace and strive for peace in our own home, we do not find it in the home of others." There's an ancient story whose origins have long been lost that speaks to this. It takes place just outside the city gates of a small city where a woman sits throughout the day. She's been there for many years, and she sells bread there throughout the day. And occasionally visitors stop and say hello. And one day, toward the end of the late afternoon, a visitor stopped, a weary traveler, and asked if this was a good place to spend the night where he could seek rest and safety. The old woman looked at him, and instead of responding directly, she said with her own question, "You do seem weary. Tell me, how far have you come? Where are you from?" And the visitor said, "Oh, well, I'm from Manchester." And the woman said, "Manchester? Well, what are the people like there?" And the traveler said, "Oh, well, frankly, I don't really like them. They're not very generous or welcoming or kind. If you ask them for help, they'll turn away. Or worse, they'll turn you down on the wrong path. No, I don't like the people in Manchester at all." And the woman said, "I'm sorry to say that the people here are much like the people you describe in Manchester. Maybe this isn't the place for you." And the traveler thanked her and said thank you, and said that he would move on to another place to find welcome. Just a little while later, another traveler, weary and tired from the road, stopped and said hello to the woman. And they too asked, "Is this a good place to spend the night?" And the woman again noticed how weary and tired the traveler was and said, "Tell me, where are you from?" And the traveler said, "Well, I'm from Manchester." And the woman said, "Oh, Manchester. Well, what are the people like there?" The traveler said, "Oh, they are wonderful. I really like them. Generous and loving, sweet, good people." "Ah," said the old woman, "I think you'll like it here. The people in my city are much like the people in Manchester. I think you'll find a safe place to rest your weary soul." To know oneself is to love oneself. This has been taught by the great philosophers since the age of reason, and Sigmund Freud. It's become a mantra of every psychologist and therapist. Radical hospitality begins with radically accepting oneself in fullness, with our weaknesses and our faults and our pain and our grief. And with self-love comes a desire to seek the inward path of spiritual fulfillment and emotional health. To accept our fundamental nature is to reject feelings of inadequacy that are broadcast in our perfectionist and overachieving dominant culture. The appearance of a paradox fades with the recognition that we do not have to choose between either or self-acceptance or growth. We can choose both. We can accept our full self while also desiring health and wholeness. This is the human journey. For me, my personal testimony to radical self-acceptance is bound up in a very spiritual relationship with the universe. I gaze upon the beauty and the creative power of this stunning planet. I look beyond all the lonely societal restrictions and the mass construction of cities and infrastructures. I look beyond all the false services and instead behold the wonder and essence of life itself. And I know I am a part of this creation, and I know that I am inherently good and in tune with the pulse of life. To feel myself connected to and a part of this ever-flowing, this ever-creating generation of new life is to breathe deeply and flow with. It is to flow with. It's a form of meditation that only happens when I visit Teresa's metaphoric spiritual castle. And while this internal work of radical hospitality is never finished, the groundwork and the solid foundation is established for the external work of radical hospitality. The external work of radical hospitality is about culture. There's a dominant culture and there's subcultures, such as Unitarian Universalists, a liberal religious faith identified with a particular history, beliefs, values, and norms that surround and feed our particular culture. Obvious things that we see in worship service are a chalice, we have joys and sorrows and hymns, and we have a particular type of hymns. We feature a sermon given usually by professional clergy. We have a coffee social hour. We love committees, governance structures, democracy, and religious education. But if you look below the surface, it's almost like an iceberg as a metaphor. On the top of an iceberg, above the water, you see the obvious things. But below the surface is the vast majority of the iceberg. And so it is with culture. The vast majority of our culture is below the surface and unidentified, usually unconscious. We, in our subculture below the surface, tend to like hierarchy, despite the fact that we tend to be anti-authoritarian. We love policies. We have a perfectionist culture. We emphasize financial security and education, individualism. We are conflict avoidant. We tend toward intellectualism. Too many of us are anti-Christian. We like humanists. Everybody has to recycle, and we proudly claim Emerson and Thoreau and all of nature as part of our worship space. And when a stranger enters our door, they enter into this culture, both above and below. But what if their culture is different? The difference between being welcoming, merely hospitable, and radically welcoming is the willingness to change our culture, rather than asking somebody else to change their culture. Usually we unconsciously invite someone new into our community and we want them to fit in, to assimilate. What if we allow our culture to change? It would mean us changing too, you and me. It's not changing our identity. They're not the same. Our identity is informed by our history, our beliefs, our mission, our vision, and our values. Culture is how we live out and into our identity. Radical hospitality requires we invite diversity with a very conscious intention. Radical hospitality sees the pursuit of diversity must be carried by everyone, not just the leadership, and does so because we are all enriched by a broader representation of humanity. Radical hospitality means everyone is responsible for rejecting the hidden norms, those hidden cultural norms that act as barriers. Radical hospitality means giving everyone the space to be fully who they are and who they want to become. So Tyrannosaurus Rex is welcome and can be whoever a Rex is meant to be, as long as our principles and covenant are upheld, such as not eating other members of the community. Flying pigs are welcome, again, as long as our principles and covenant are upheld, so sorry, no mud in the chapel. If a pink puppy discovers in their internal exploration that they're really a dragon, then we can help and support a transformation into a dragon. There's no checklist, folks, no goals, there's no achievement tests. In fact, it only takes one barrier for a stranger to feel unwelcome and turn away. So radical hospitality is not about intellectual mastery. It's about relationships, heartfelt relationships. It requires the capacity, the courage, and the willingness to see the unique needs of each person. by developing relationships through trust and a willingness to be vulnerable. That way, if a barrier is found, instead of leaving, a new friend may inquire with curiosity rather than leave in fear and rejection. In today's virtual community, we very much need to reach out to one another, strengthening our bonds, building new relationships, and with each step, take responsibility to dismantle the barriers to being radically welcoming. The best tools are humility, curiosity, and the willingness to be vulnerable. These are the tools that the great mystics and the best teachers of the world religions have been offering for thousands of years. And today we also find this wisdom in the world of psychotherapy. So my charge to you this week is to call someone at Mount Vernon Unitarian Church, or even one of your neighbors or friends that you don't know very well. For our longtime members, call a new member. For our new members, answer the phone. Then pass on the hospitality with your own phone call to another new member. And if you don't have a directory, no excuse. If you've not already done so, you can create an account on our ACS database system. It's found on our website. And then you can download the Church Life app on your smartphone. Our whole directory will then be in your hand. We're also going to facilitate this cross-fertilization by launching the neighborhood covenant groups. We hope to have this up and running by mid-September. So keep an eye out for emails and how we're creating new connections of radical hospitality right within your general neighborhood and introducing you to your MVUC neighbors. I hope for now that we all find our internal castle is filled with rooms of peace and love. May we all find our hearts opening up to the stranger, welcoming each other into our lives, ready to be